The ISS Valkyrie was never meant to break the wall. For centuries, the galactic wall had stood as an impassable boundary, an invisible, unbreakable barrier that marked the edge of known space. No species dared to cross it. No probes returned from the other side. Even the most powerful empires of the galaxy whispered of its horrors, treating it as a divine threshold never to be violated. But humans? Humans never did well with boundaries. Commander Adrian Kane stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, hands clasped behind his back as the final countdown began. The ship was a testament to human ingenuity, an experimental warship reinforced with cutting-edge technology, built for the sole purpose of answering the one question that had haunted humanity for generations. What lies beyond? "All systems green," came the voice of Chief Engineer Kira Vasquez. "The resonance drive is stable. No anomalies." Kane nodded. "Then this is it." He glanced at the viewing screen, where the galactic wall loomed ahead. It wasn't a structure in the traditional sense. No towering fortifications, no metallic barrier. It was a distortion in space itself, a shimmering, churning vortex of unknown energy, stretching endlessly in all directions. It exuded an unnatural stillness, as though the universe itself ended here. "1 minute to impact," said Lieutenant Omar Patel. His voice was steady, but his hands twitched over his console. Everyone had heard the legends. The wall didn't let anything through. It didn't just repel, it erased. But the Valkyrie was built differently. Human scientists had spent decades studying the wall's frequency, deciphering its strange energy signatures. They believed, hoped, that their new resonance drive could break through where all others had failed. "Commander, are we really doing this?" Vasquez asked, her voice softer now. Kane met her eyes. He understood her fear. This wasn't just a mission. It was a leap into the unknown, the kind of insanity that defined human history. They had always been the species to push past limits, to spit in the face of danger. But sometimes, that arrogance led to catastrophe. "We came all this way," he said. "We finished what we started." Silence fell. Then, 5 seconds, Patel called. The Valkyrie surged forward. A blinding light consumed the ship as it met the wall. Energy crackled around them, alarms blaring in protest. The ship shuddered, metal groaning as if resisting the sheer force of existence itself. And then, they were through. The bridge fell into eerie silence. The crew blinked at their screens. The turbulence was gone. The ship was intact. But the universe around them was wrong. Kane's breath hitched as he gazed at the screen. The stars had changed. They weren't simply shifted. They were different. Twisted constellations, unnatural spirals of glowing nebulae. And worst of all, a looming, monolithic shape in the distance, an enormous structure drifting in the void like the corpse of a god. And then came the sound. A deep, reverberating hum filled the air, sinking into their bones. It wasn't from the ship. It wasn't from their comms. It was coming from outside. Something had noticed them. Something beyond the wall. The hum grew louder. It wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration that pressed into them, seeping into their bones, rattling their skulls. The bridge lights flickered, and for a split second, the walls of the Valkyrie seemed to stretch and contract, as if reality itself was breathing. "Status report!" Kane barked, shaking off the nausea twisting his stomach. "All systems still functional," Vasquez said, her fingers flying over her console. "But, Commander, I don't know what the hell we're looking at out there." She wasn't the only one. Every screen on the bridge showed the same view. An impossible landscape of alien stars, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The massive, monolithic structure in the distance loomed over everything like an ancient sentinel. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that something was moving. At first, it was barely noticeable. A ripple in the void, like light bending around an unseen force. Then, shadows, slithering between the stars, shifting in ways that made no sense. Shapes that had no form, yet felt alive. Detecting something, Patel murmured. His hands were trembling. No, many somethings. They're not on any known spectrum. It's like they're outside normal space. Kane's jaw tightened. Weapons status? Online, Patel confirmed. But sir, I don't know if our weapons will even work here. That was the terrifying truth. The Valkyrie was built for war, but it had never been meant to fight this. The hum deepened. The entire ship groaned in response, metal straining as though unseen hands were pressing against its hull. Then, a voice. Not spoken. Not heard. It bypassed the ears and slammed directly into their minds. You are not supposed to be here. The crew recoiled. Patel let out a strangled gasp. Vasquez clutched her head, face contorted in pain. Kane gritted his teeth, fighting against the overwhelming pressure in his skull. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence, vast, endless, wrong. Kane forced himself to speak, though his voice felt small in the face of something so limitless. Who are you? He demanded. What is this place? Silence. Then, the shadows stirred. The monolithic structure in the distance shifted, a deep, gut-wrenching sensation of movement, not through space, but through something else. Then, another message. Turn back. Kane swallowed hard. The wall was supposed to be a mystery, a boundary, a challenge to be overcome. But now, for the first time, a question slithered into his mind. Had the wall been built to keep them out, or to keep something else in? Commander, Vasquez whispered, I think we're in serious trouble. The ship's lights flickered again. The shadows surrounding them twitched like a nest of awakening predators, and then the Valkyrie's sensors screamed in alarm. Something was coming. Something vast, something that had noticed them. The Valkyrie's alarms howled, filling the bridge with a shrill, panicked wail. The movement in the void had become unmistakable. Something was closing in. Multiple contacts, Patel's voice cracked as he stared at his screen. I can't get a solid reading, but they're big. Bigger than anything we've ever seen. Kane's pulse pounded. His instincts screamed to turn and run, but every sensor, every readout made one thing horrifyingly clear. There was nowhere to run. The space beyond the wall didn't obey the same rules. The stars were wrong. The distances didn't make sense. And the things moving toward them? They weren't ships. They weren't even solid. They were watching. Vasquez, power up the resonance drive, Kane ordered. If we need to punch out, I want that thing ready to go. Vasquez's fingers flew across her console. I'm trying, but something's interfering with the drive. It's like the laws of physics are... She exhaled sharply. Breaking down around us. The hum in the air thickened, pressing against their skulls. Kane clenched his jaw, pushing past the pain. The voice returned. You were warned. The shadows lunged. The Valkyrie shook violently as an invisible force crashed against it. The screens flickered, distorting into impossible patterns. The crew screamed as their bodies pulled in multiple directions at once, stretched between the fabric of existence and something else. Shields failing, Patel shouted. Kane didn't hesitate. Fire everything! Full spread! The bridge lights flared red as the Valkyrie's weapons roared to life. Railguns spat slugs of hyper-dense metal. Plasma cannons erupted in fiery arcs. Missiles streaked into the void, locking onto nothing. And then, impact. The shadows reacted. The moment the first shot landed, a terrible, piercing screech tore through the ship. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a presence of rage, of something old and hungry. The void writhed, and the shadows struck back. An unseen force slammed into the Valkyrie, sending it spiraling. The artificial gravity flickered, and for a moment Kane felt himself lifted outside his body, staring into something far, far larger than himself. A shape. A city of twisting, writhing towers, stretching beyond infinity. A place that was alive. A place that had been waiting. And in the heart of it, something turned its gaze upon him. Kane crashed back into his seat with a ragged gasp. The vision vanished, but the dread remained. "We have to leave," Vasquez screamed. "Resonance drive at 60%. I'm forcing a bypass." The ship groaned as another impact rocked it. Patel clung to his console, his face pale with terror. "They're getting closer, Commander." Kane's fists clenched. His body wanted to shake. His instincts screamed to panic, but he forced himself to stay steady. "Vasquez," he said, voice like steel. "Whatever it takes. Get us out of here." Outside, the void shifted. The monolithic structure in the distance was no longer distant. It was moving, and it was reaching for them. The Valkyrie shuddered under another unseen impact, the force rippling through its reinforced hull like a hammer striking glass. Kane's grip on his chair tightened as he scanned the distorted readings on the display. The sensors were useless, constantly shifting, unable to make sense of whatever was out there. The only thing they knew for sure was that something vast and wrong was closing in. "Resonance drive at 70%, Vasquez yelled over the alarms. Sweat glistened on her brow as she frantically rerouted power, bypassing safety protocols and redlining the system. "I can force an early activation, but—" She didn't finish her sentence, because at that moment the Valkyrie lurched, not forward, not backward, but sideways, as if space itself had grabbed the ship and dragged it. Kane felt the pull deep in his gut, a nauseating sensation of being unstuck from reality. His vision blurred, momentarily flickering between what he knew to be real and something else entirely. A glimpse of a city. Not built, grown. Towering, spiraling structures of blackened material, shifting and pulsating as if breathing. Rivers of liquid light coursed between them, feeding into vast, towering obelisks. The sky was not a sky, but a churning mass of eyes, impossible, uncountable, staring in all directions at once. And then, a presence. It saw him, not just him, humanity. A wave of understanding flooded his mind, a warning, a punishment, a question, and then, a choice. Kane gasped as reality snapped back. He was in his chair again. The bridge was still there, his crew, alive, though barely holding on. Vasquez coughed and wiped blood from her nose. "Commander, we're losing structural integrity. Whatever this place is, it's trying to keep us here." Kane didn't need a scientist to tell him that. He could feel it. The more they resisted, the more the space around them tightened, pulling them deeper. "Patel!" Kane barked, his voice like iron. "Weapons now! I don't care if you can't see a target. Fire everything at maximum yield." Patel's hands flew over the controls. "Aye, Commander! Firing now!" The Valkyrie unleashed hell. Railguns roared, their slugs vanishing into the distorted void. Plasma lances cut through the darkness, striking something. The shadows convulsed, writhing in response to the assault. The deep hum that had plagued them since their arrival wavered, flickering between frequencies like a wounded animal howling in agony. And then, for the first time, the shadows screamed. The force of it was indescribable, not sound, not light, but meaning. It spoke directly into their existence, a raw and primal command that resonated in every molecule of their being. "You will not leave." The ship twisted violently. Bulkheads groaned, consoles exploded, A shower of sparks rained across the bridge as the artificial gravity failed for a fraction of a second. Kane slammed against his restraints, gritting his teeth against the suffocating weight of the entity's presence pressing down upon them. Vasquez's hands flew across the console. "Resonance drive at 95%! We're almost there! Just hold on!" Kane's mind raced. They had seconds. Maybe less. Whatever was beyond the wall, it wasn't just alive. It wasn't just watching. It was waiting. And now that they had come, it wouldn't let them go without a price. "Patel," Kane grunted. "Fire again. Everything. Now." "Sir, we barely—" "Now!" Patel slammed his palm onto the controls. The Valkyrie roared. Every remaining weapon system fired at once. Missiles, railguns, plasma bursts, kinetic rounds. The void erupted in a storm of fury, the impact sending ripples through the shadows. And then, a breach. For a split second, the Valkyrie's sensors detected something real. A distortion. A weak point in whatever force held them. Kane didn't hesitate. "Vasquez!" he roared. "Punch it!" Vasquez slammed the command key. The Valkyrie's engine screamed as the resonance drive activated at full force. A shockwave of energy blasted outward, tearing through the unnatural gravity pulling them down. The ship shuddered, its hull groaning as it pushed past the threshold. The last thing Kane saw before the ship ripped free was the city, moving. Not crumbling, not fading, advancing, reaching. The Valkyrie surged forward, space folding around it as the resonance drive punched them back toward the wall. The distorted reality blurred, and then, in an instant, they were through. Silence. The Valkyrie hung in the void, its systems flickering, stabilizing. The stars were right again. The galaxy, their galaxy, stretched before them. They had escaped. But the hum, it was still there, quieter, fainter, but no longer coming from outside. It was coming from within the ship. Kane closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. They had broken the wall, but something had followed them through. The Valkyrie floated in the familiar vastness of space, but something was wrong. Kane sat rigid in his command chair, his breath coming in slow, controlled pulls. The hum, the ever-present, suffocating hum, was no longer outside. It vibrated within the walls of the ship, like a second heartbeat thrumming beneath the metal. Vasquez wiped sweat and blood from her forehead, checking the status of their location. We're back," she said, voice laced with disbelief. "Confirmed. We've crossed the wall." Patel let out a heavy breath, sagging over his console. "Jesus," he muttered. "I thought we were done for." They should have felt relief. They had survived the unknowable, fought their way back into real space. The mission, for all its failures, had accomplished the impossible. But no one relaxed, because something was still here. "Talk to me," Kane ordered, keeping his voice steady. "Systems report?" Patel's fingers danced across his console. His eyes darted nervously over the data. "No major hull breaches, no critical failures, engines, strained but operational," he said. "Resonance drive is fried, though. We won't be making another jump like that anytime soon." Vasquez frowned. "Life support is running nominal, but—" She hesitated. Kane turned to her sharply. "But what?" She exhaled, visibly unsettled. "Atmospheric readings are fluctuating, sir. Barely noticeable, but it's like something's interfering with our oxygen levels." Kane's stomach tightened. "Radiation?" She shook her head. "No." A new silence settled over the bridge. The crew felt it now, that lingering, crawling sensation beneath their skin. The hum was subtle, but now that they knew it was there, it felt invasive. Kane switched the comms to ship-wide. "All hands, report any unusual activity immediately," he ordered. "That includes auditory or visual hallucinations, unexpected power fluctuations, or... A sudden clatter echoed from behind him. Everyone turned. Patel's tablet had fallen to the floor. It slid backward, against the natural gravity of the ship. A breath of cold air brushed past Kane's cheek. Vasquez whispered, "Commander, something's in here." Kane was already on his feet. "Arm yourselves now!" The bridge crew scrambled, retrieving weapons from the emergency lockers. The standard-issue sidearms were designed for boarding conflicts, but Kane had the terrible feeling they would be useless against whatever had followed them back. The lights flickered. And then, the whisper, not sound, not words, but a presence speaking into their minds. "You brought us home!" Kane's grip tightened on his weapon. His breath came slow, measured. "Show yourself." The air rippled. A shape flickered in the periphery of their vision. No solid form, no recognizable features, just a disturbance. The hum deepened, pressing into their skulls. Then the security alarm screamed. "Containment breach detected in medbay," the ship's AI blared. Kane's heart slammed against his ribs. "Vasquez, with me. Patel, hold the bridge." They moved fast, weapons raised, sprinting down the corridor. The emergency lights strobed, casting jagged shadows along the walls. The hum grew louder as they neared the medbay. Kane reached for the door panel, and it opened before he touched it. Inside, the room was dark, cold. The hum vibrated through the medical equipment. And in the center, a figure stood. It was human, or it had been. The thing turned. The light caught its features: sunken eyes, too wide pupils, skin stretched too tightly over its face. Its uniform was standard-issue Valkyrie crew attire, but wrong, as if it had been molded over the body instead of worn. Kane recognized him instantly. "Private O'Malley." O'Malley had died in the initial breach. His body had been vaporized when the hull collapsed. And yet, here he stood, smiling. His mouth moved, but his voice did not match. It was layered, distorted, echoing with something else. "We are here. We are many." The hum rose into a piercing screech. The lights died. And all around them the air moved. The darkness swallowed them whole. Kane's breath came in slow, controlled pulls as his eyes adjusted to the medbay's dim emergency lights. Vasquez stood beside him, weapon raised, her knuckles white around the grip. The thing that had been O'Malley stood in front of them, still smiling, its empty eyes fixed on Kane. The hum wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was in the air, in their bones. "Private," Kane said carefully, keeping his gun steady. "You're supposed to be dead." O'Malley's mouth twitched, stretching too wide. "Was," he replied, his voice layered with a chorus of whispers. "But the wall, it does not let go so easily." The emergency lights flickered again. Behind O'Malley, the air moved. No, shifted. Shapes slithered through the shadows, their outlines barely perceptible. Kane's instincts screamed at him to run, but he stood his ground. Vasquez inhaled sharply. "Commander, this isn't just one of them." Number it wasn't. O'Malley's body was just a doorway. Something else was coming through. Kane steadied his voice. "You shouldn't be here." O'Malley tilted his head. That wrong smile still etched across his face. "Neither should you." His pupils dilated, expanding unnaturally until they consumed his irises. "We were waiting, for so long. And then, you opened the way." The hum spiked, the room shook. Vasquez fired. The shot was dead on, plasma round burning a hole straight through O'Malley's chest. He didn't fall. He barely even reacted. The wound sizzled, but instead of bleeding, it spread. Dark tendrils unraveling from the edges, curling outward as if tasting the air. O'Malley laughed, the sound scraping against their eardrums like static. Then he took a step forward. Kane's instincts kicked in. "Fall back!" He and Vasquez sprinted for the door as the medbay erupted into chaos. The shadows lunged, writhing across the floor, reaching with jagged, finger-like tendrils. Kane dove through the doorway as Vasquez slammed the emergency lockdown. The reinforced blast door sealed shut just as something slammed into it from the other side. Kane stumbled back, his chest heaving. Vasquez stood beside him, weapon trembling in her grip. The medbay's speakers crackled. Then, O'Malley's voice whispered through the ship. "Let us in!" The lights overhead burst, plunging the corridor into flickering red. And from the walls, the humming grew louder. Back on the bridge, Patel's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, what the hell is going on?" Kane took a breath. "Medbay is compromised." He forced himself to stay calm. "We've got something. Something wearing O'Malley's face." A pause. Then Patel's voice came back, lower, uncertain. "Sir, we have a problem up here too." Kane's stomach clenched. "What kind of problem?" Another pause. Then, "We just got an incoming transmission." Kane and Vasquez exchanged a glance. "From who?" Patel's voice came back, almost a whisper. "From us." The blood drained from Kane's face. "Repeat that." Patel swallowed. "Sir, we're receiving a distress signal from the Valkyrie." Kane's grip tightened around his weapon. "That's not possible." The comms buzzed. Patel's voice was shaky now. "It's on all frequencies. The signature is 100% match. It's us, Commander." A sharp inhale. "And sir, it's begging for help." The hum rose again. Deep, crawling. And now, it was whispering their names. The distress signal didn't stop. Even as Kane and Vasquez ran back to the bridge, the eerie broadcast played on every available frequency. It was their ship, their voices, and yet, "Please, we don't have much time!" "It followed us. We never should have gone beyond the wall." "Oh God, they're already inside." The message cut off. Then it looped. Kane's heart pounded in his chest. Vasquez ran beside him, eyes darting toward every shadow as they moved through the dimly lit corridors. The hum was no longer just beneath the walls. It moved with them now, slithering through the air, pressing against their minds. They reached the bridge and sealed the doors behind them. Patel was at his station, pale-faced, his hands gripping the console like a lifeline. It's been playing on repeat, Commander," he muttered. "It's us, but it can't be us." Kane exhaled sharply. "Play it again." Patel hesitated. Then he pressed the control. The transmission buzzed back to life. "This is the UHS Valkyrie, requesting immediate assistance. Kane's breath hitched. He heard his own voice. It was him, panicked, desperate. "We breached the wall. Something followed us back." Then another voice, a garbled, half-human shriek, interrupted. Then silence. Kane's stomach turned to ice. "That's impossible. That's not us." Vasquez's voice was tight. "Commander, what if it is?" The thought was too much. Kane shook his head. "Number, we're here. This is real." Patel swallowed hard. "Then what the hell is sending that signal?" Silence fell over the bridge. And then, a new message crackled over the comms. "You shouldn't have come back. It wasn't a recording. It was live." The lights flickered. The screens distorted. The hum inside the ship turned into a guttural, bone-rattling vibration. Vasquez spun toward Patel. "Cut the signal! Now!" Patel's hands flew over the controls. "I'm trying." His fingers hovered over the interface, but it wasn't responding. The screens warped, the text shifting into incomprehensible symbols. And then, a video feed activated. The bridge crew froze. The screen showed another bridge, identical, same consoles, same layout, same emergency lights flickering overhead, and standing in the center were them. Kane's breath locked in his throat. He saw himself, standing in the same uniform, eyes wide with terror. Patel was at the same station, fingers hovering over a broken console. Vasquez stood beside them, weapon raised. It was the Valkyrie, but not this one. The other Kane looked straight into the camera. And then, the thing stepped forward. It wasn't human, not entirely. It wore a uniform that resembled a UHS officer's attire, but it clung wrong, like a second skin stretched over something else. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth too wide, its hands too long. It moved like it remembered being human. It stood behind the other Kane, its fingers resting on his shoulders like a puppeteer. And as Kane and his crew watched in horror, the thing on the screen grinned. The transmission cut, and the ship lurched. A deep, grinding sound echoed through the hull, like metal bending under impossible force. The hum swelled, becoming a deafening roar. The emergency lights died, leaving only the dim glow of the consoles. Then the whispers started, inside the bridge. Kane turned sharply. The shadows in the corners of the room had grown thicker, moving, shifting, forming shapes. A voice spoke behind him. His own voice. "You brought us home." Kane's blood turned to ice. They weren't alone anymore. The ship was breaking apart. Not in a physical way. There were no hull breaches, no alarms blaring about catastrophic failure. But the Valkyrie was still coming undone. The whispers in the walls were everywhere now, crawling beneath the crew's skin, settling inside their thoughts like parasites. The lights flickered wildly, casting twisting shadows that never quite matched their movements. And worst of all, the other crew was inside. Kane's heart pounded as he turned in slow horror. They stood at the far end of the bridge, copies of himself, Vasquez, Patel, and the others. But they were wrong. Their uniforms were faded like old photographs. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths just a little too wide. And when they moved, it was with a delay, like a memory struggling to stay real. The other Kane smiled. "You shouldn't have come back." Kane's grip tightened around his sidearm. "You're not real." The thing wearing his face cocked its head. "Neither are you." The words slammed into Kane's skull with an almost physical force. His vision wavered. For half a second, he wasn't standing on the Valkyrie's bridge anymore. He was floating, surrounded by endless black. No ship, no crew, just void. A whisper curled around his ear. "You left us behind." He blinked, snapping back to reality. Vasquez's voice cut through the haze. "Commander." The others were moving now, stepping toward them in eerie synchronization. Kane fired. The plasma shot ripped straight through his doppelganger's chest. It did nothing. The thing wearing his face took another step forward, smiling wider. Vasquez didn't wait. She grabbed Patel and pulled him toward the emergency override panel. "We need to get out of here now!" Kane backed up, his mind racing. "Where's the real ship?" Patel's voice was panicked. "What if this is the real ship?" That was the trick. That was the trap. The Valkyrie had shattered the wall, and now it was inside the fracture. Kane forced himself to think. If this place was an echo, if it was just a loop, then there had to be a way to break it. The thing wearing his face was almost close enough to touch now. Kane made a split-second decision. "Brace!" He slammed his fist onto the emergency purge controls. A warning siren blared. The ship's core overloaded, and the Valkyrie fell. The sensation was indescribable. It wasn't like entering warp, where space bent and twisted in familiar ways. This was deeper. The universe itself ripped apart. The ship tore free from the wall's grasp, plunging into something else. And then, silence. Kane gasped, sucking in breath as if he'd been drowning. The hum was gone. The lights were normal. The ship's systems stabilized. Vasquez groaned, pushing herself up from the floor. What the hell just happened? Kane turned towards the view screen. The wall was behind them now, distant and silent. No whispers, no shadows. Just a great, empty void, stretching beyond human comprehension. Patel checked the readings. Sir, we're back. We're in known space. His voice was shaking. We made it. Kane exhaled. Status check. Vasquez tapped at her wrist console. All hands accounted for. Patel hesitated, then his face paled. Not all. Kane's stomach dropped. What? Patel swallowed hard. We have one extra crew member. Kane's blood ran cold. They turned, and at the far end of the bridge, standing perfectly still, was a figure. It was wearing a Valkyrie uniform. But its face was missing. The lights flickered, and the hum started again. Kane sat in his quarters, staring at the single sheet of paper on his desk. The incident report. He was supposed to fill it out, explain what had happened beyond the wall, detail the breach, the encounter, the thing they had brought back with them. But how could he put it into words? How could he describe the way reality itself had twisted around them, the way the Valkyrie had been copied, consumed, replaced? How could he explain that something was still here? The hum had returned. Faint, almost imperceptible. But it was there. Vasquez had noticed it, too. She hadn't spoken much since they returned, but her eyes were constantly moving, scanning the corridors, watching the shadows. Patel had buried himself in his work, checking sensor logs over and over, as if the numbers might change and tell him something different. The extra crew member was never found. No logs showed when or where they had come aboard. No records of their face, their name. And yet, the ship's manifest was clear. The Valkyrie had one extra soul. Kane exhaled, rubbing his temples. He had considered filing an emergency quarantine request when they returned to human space. Considered turning the ship over to higher authorities. Scientists, investigators, anyone who might understand what had happened. But something inside him stopped. A feeling. A whisper. A part of him knew. If they drew too much attention to what had happened, if they let others start looking too closely, the thing might not like that. Kane picked up his pen. He wrote a single sentence on the report. No anomalies detected. Mission success. Returning to port. He stared at the words. And then, somewhere in the room, something shifted. The lights flickered. The hum grew louder, and behind him, a shadow moved. The deep void of space stretched infinitely in all directions, a silent, unbroken expanse of darkness speckled with the dim glow of distant stars. The planet Vecran 6, a lonely and desolate rock orbiting a dying sun, had been deemed a null world, a place where nothing of importance would ever happen. The ruling civilizations of the galaxy had written it off centuries ago. No trade routes ran through its system, no advanced species had any interest in colonizing it, and its resources were too insignificant to warrant exploitation. To the Vicranian Council, the supreme governing body of the Galactic Order, it was nothing more than an afterthought. And that was precisely why they had chosen it for their secret meeting. 7 of the most powerful species in the known galaxy had gathered on Vecran 6, their massive ships hovering above its barren surface like silent, predatory birds. Each delegation had sent their most trusted representatives, warlords, senators, and high-ranking officials, to discuss a matter of grave importance: humanity. The newcomers to the galactic stage had been underestimated at first, a primitive species from a backwater planet, barely emerging from their solar system a few centuries ago. The Council had assumed they would take their place quietly, slotting into the vast bureaucracy of the galactic hierarchy like every other young race before them. But humanity was different. They refused to bow. They refused to accept their assigned status as a lesser race. Instead, they fought. They clawed their way through the galactic ranks with an almost reckless determination, their aggressive expansion and brutal military tactics shocking even the oldest and most powerful empires. They had no right to be so effective. Their ships were crude compared to the sleek, hyper-advanced vessels of the other species. Their technology was stolen, salvaged, and repurposed from the wreckage of their enemies. And yet somehow, they kept winning. The Council had come to one conclusion. Humanity was a threat that needed to be contained. That was the purpose of this secret meeting. A final decision had been made, one that would wipe humanity from existence before it was too late. A holographic image of Earth hovered above the central war table, its blue and green surface looking almost peaceful in the sterile glow of the chamber. The Vicranian Council's high speaker, a towering insectoid with shimmering carapace plates, gestured toward it with a clawed limb. Total eradication is the only solution, he clicked in a cold, mechanical voice. We have underestimated this species long enough. If we allow them to grow unchecked, they will disrupt the balance we have maintained for millennia. The gathered leaders nodded in grim agreement. Then it is settled, an avian-like warlord rasped. We strike at their homeworld before they can retaliate. The fleet moves within the cycle. It was decided. A grand coalition of warships would descend upon Earth, wiping humanity from existence before they could solidify their power. It was a foolproof plan, until the alarms started blaring. A sudden, piercing siren filled the war chamber, the artificial voice of the station's security AI crackling to life. Unauthorized fleet detected, multiple warp signatures inbound, extreme hostile intent confirmed. The gathered leaders turned to the large viewing window just in time to see the impossible. A fleet, not theirs, humanity's. Hundreds of warships emerged from hyperspace, each one a monstrous fusion of steel, firepower, and raw defiance. They came in formations, moving with ruthless precision, their hulls scarred from 100 battles but still standing strong. Leading them was the ISS Retribution, a dreadnought of terrifying size, its cannons already glowing with the ominous charge of particle-based weaponry. A transmission cut through the security channels, overriding every encrypted frequency with a single message. A voice, unmistakably human, filled the air with a quiet, lethal certainty. No one was meant to arrive, huh? Well, that's too bad. Because we're here. The first shots were fired, and the war for humanity's survival had begun. The silence after the transmission was brief but suffocating. For the gathered galactic leaders, time seemed to slow as they stared out the viewport at the impossible. Humanity's war fleet, in numbers they had never imagined, armed with weapons that should have been decades behind their own, but somehow, horrifyingly, were still lethal. The first volley struck the outer defense stations before the assembled warlords could even issue a command. Bright lances of plasma and kinetic rounds tore through the fragile orbital platforms, sending debris spiraling in all directions. The humans hadn't come for diplomacy. They hadn't come to negotiate. They had come for war. Inside the council chamber, panic set in. This is an act of madness, the avian warlord shrieked, his razor-edged wings flaring wide. They're attacking us? Here? They must know they have no chance against the full might of the coalition. They should have no chance, another leader hissed, his reptilian tail thrashing against the smooth floor in agitation. Our intelligence indicated their fleet was fragmented, that they lacked proper coordination. What is this? The Vicranian high speaker, his insectoid mind working faster than the others, realized the terrifying truth. They knew. The other leaders turned to him, their confusion evident. The speaker's mandibles clicked together in unease. They knew about this meeting, knew about our plans to strike first. His many eyes reflected the sight of the human fleet as it closed in. This is a preemptive attack. The room fell silent. Then the chamber doors exploded inward. A shockwave sent bodies tumbling, thick smoke rolling into the room as armored figures stormed inside. Their weapons, primitive yet brutal, fired in tight, controlled bursts. The first to fall was the avian warlord, his feathery body crumpling as kinetic rounds punched through his ornate battle cloak. The others barely had time to react before the humans were upon them. They weren't like the elites of the Vicranian Guard or the ceremonial warriors of the Galactic Coalition. These were soldiers, hardened by war, trained in the kind of ruthless, efficient combat that the Council had never encountered firsthand. The leader of the human strike team stepped forward, helmeted, armored, his rifle still smoking. His voice was distorted through the helmet's speaker, but there was no mistaking the sheer disdain behind it. You thought you could decide our fate in some secret little meeting, he said, stepping over the body of a fallen counselor. You thought you could wipe us out while we sat back and waited? He reached up, unclipping his helmet and pulling it free. The face beneath was scarred, weathered, human, with piercing eyes that carried the weight of a species that had fought for everything it had. We heard every word, he said, tossing a small, pulsing device onto the war table. A signal jammer. They had been listening in all along. The Vicranian high speaker tried to retreat, his many limbs moving in frantic desperation. This is a mistake. Your people don't have to suffer this fate. The human soldier's lips curled into a smile, one devoid of humor. Oh, we're not the ones suffering, he said. You are. Above, outside the station, the battle reached a fever pitch. Human warships, vastly outnumbered but not outmatched, tore into the coalition forces with an almost surgical precision. They fought like cornered beasts, like a species that refused to die quietly. The war for Vecran 6 was just beginning, and humanity had drawn first blood. The chaos of battle had reached every level of the station. Outside, human warships carved through the Coalition's fleet, their weapons punching holes in enemy vessels that had, until now, never known true war. Inside, elite human soldiers tore through the security forces, moving with terrifying efficiency. For the first time in centuries, the so-called supreme rulers of the galaxy felt fear. The Vicranian high speaker scrambled backward, his many limbs shaking as he watched the human soldier before him. The rest of the council members had either been gunned down or captured, their bodies lying motionless on the pristine floor of the war chamber. The stench of burning ozone filled the air. This is insanity, the high speaker gasped, his mandibles clicking frantically. You think you can win a war against the entire galaxy? The human, still holding his rifle at a low ready, tilted his head slightly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held the cold, lethal confidence of a predator who had already decided the outcome. You really don't get it, do you? He muttered. The high speaker's multiple eyes darted around, searching for any possible escape. We are the Supreme Order, he choked out. Our empire has stood for thousands of cycles. You, your people, you're nothing but a fleeting species, a mistake. The human let out a dry, humorless chuckle. Yeah? And yet here we are, he said, spreading his arms slightly, motioning toward the carnage around them. Your defenses? Gone. Your fleet? Burning. Your leaders? His eyes flicked down to the bodies littering the chamber floor. Pretty self-explanatory. He took a step forward, and the high speaker flinched. Here's the thing, Bug, the soldier continued, voice like steel. You all got used to easy wars, political maneuvering, power plays from a distance. You built your armies for intimidation, not survival. He crouched slightly, bringing himself eye level with the trembling alien. Humanity. We only know war. A deafening explosion rocked the station. From the viewport, the high speaker saw it. A massive coalition battleship, one of the strongest vessels in the entire galactic fleet, was splitting apart. It hadn't been destroyed by orbital bombardment. It hadn't been overwhelmed by numbers. A human boarding team had taken it from within. The realization hit the high speaker like a physical blow. The humans had anticipated everything. They hadn't just come to attack. They had come to conquer. The human soldier raised his weapon, his expression dark. This is what happens when you back a species into a corner, he said. You tried to erase us. You tried to decide our fate before we even had a seat at the table. The high speaker tried to protest, tried to say anything, but the words never came. Because at that moment, another voice came through the humans' comms. Fleet Admiral Sullivan to all ground teams. The station is secure. Begin Phase 2. The soldier pressed a finger to his earpiece. Copy that, he responded before turning back to the high speaker. A slow, creeping horror filled the Vicranian's mind. Phase 2? He whispered. The human only smirked. Oh, don't worry, he said. You'll see soon enough. Above, the battle was already shifting. Coalition forces had gone from defense to desperation. Their formations were breaking, their warships turning to flee. But there was nowhere to run. The human fleet had surrounded them. No one had been meant to arrive at Vecran 6, but humanity had come anyway. And now? The war had only just begun. The battle outside had turned into a massacre. Coalition warships, once symbols of unquestioned power, were reduced to burning wrecks, their shattered hulls drifting in the void. The mighty fleets that had ruled the galaxy for millennia were dying at the hands of an enemy they had considered little more than an inconvenience. The humans fought with a brutality that the Council had never anticipated. They didn't just win, they annihilated. The Vicranian high speaker watched in silent horror as the transmission feeds showed his empire crumbling in real time. The great galactic order was breaking apart, and nothing they did could stop it. The human standing before him adjusted his rifle, glancing at the carnage displayed on the holographic screens. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. There was no arrogance, only the cold efficiency of a soldier carrying out a mission. Phase 2, the high speaker rasped, struggling to suppress the trembling in his voice. What does that mean? The soldier just smiled. You're about to find out. A sudden shudder ran through the station. Then another. The high speaker's mandibles clicked in distress as he looked to the holographic displays. Something big had arrived. No. Multiple things. The human fleet had expanded. More warships had dropped from hyperspace, their blackened hulls adorned with the battle scars of countless conflicts. But these weren't just battleships. These were dreadnoughts, siege-class vessels, planet crackers, ships designed for occupation and extermination. The Vicranian's mind reeled. This isn't just a battle, he whispered in realization. The soldier tilted his head. No, he admitted. It's not. The real invasion was beginning. Vecran 6 had been chosen for its isolation. The Council had assumed no one would notice their war meeting here. But the humans had been watching all along. They had used this system as bait, letting the galaxy's leaders gather in one place before striking all at once. And now? Now they were taking it all. Troop ships launched from the dreadnoughts, descending on the planet's surface like falling meteors. Thousands, millions of human soldiers were landing in coordinated waves, their objectives clear. Capture the leadership, secure the planet, and send a message that could never be ignored. The High Speaker's breathing turned ragged. "You don't understand what you're doing," he tried to reason. "The Council controls entire empires. Even if you win here, others will come for you." The human soldier sighed, shaking his head. "You still don't get it," he said. "We're not just fighting for territory." He turned toward the viewport, watching his fleet tear apart the Coalition's last defenses. "We're fighting for our place in the galaxy." He turned back, his expression unreadable. "And we don't lose." The High Speaker could barely process what was happening. The Vicranian Council, the most powerful ruling body in the galaxy, had believed humanity was manageable, that they could be crushed before they became a real problem. Instead, the Coalition was dying before his very eyes. The chamber doors opened, and more human soldiers entered, their weapons trained on the last remaining leaders of the Council. The High Speaker felt cold hands grip his limbs as he was dragged to his feet. "You can kill me," he spat, "but the galaxy will never accept this. The other empires will never allow humanity to rule." The human soldier leaned in, voice calm but firm. "We don't need their permission." He gestured towards the viewport, where the last Coalition battleship was breaking apart in a massive explosion, its remains swallowed by the void. "This is what happens when you try to erase us," he continued. "You thought we were weak. You thought we'd fall in line like every other species you conquered." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Instead, you just started a war that humanity is going to finish." The High Speaker's body tensed as he finally, truly understood. This wasn't just about survival. This was humanity's ascension. The war for Vecran 6 was over. The war for the galaxy had just begun. The Vicranian High Speaker had spent centuries believing in the supremacy of the Galactic Council. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed civilizations, and rewritten history to erase those who resisted. But as he was dragged through the blood-stained halls of the station, flanked by human soldiers with grim faces and unreadable eyes, he realized something terrifying. The humans weren't afraid of the Council. They weren't trying to negotiate or bargain or beg for recognition. They had come to replace it. The station trembled as another explosion rocked its structure. The war outside was over, but the occupation had begun. The dreadnoughts in orbit had started deploying their full payloads: city-killer warforms, orbital cannons, entire battalions of hardened soldiers, all methodically securing Vecran 6, block by block. There would be no resistance. The High Speaker was shoved forward into a heavily guarded chamber. More humans were inside, dressed differently from the soldiers, officers, strategists, commanders. And in the center of them all sat the one figure who made the High Speaker's blood run cold. Fleet Admiral Sullivan, the human leader who had orchestrated this coup against the galaxy itself. He was older than the soldier who had captured him, his face lined with the marks of a lifetime spent in war. His uniform bore the scars of combat, yet there was an air of absolute control about him. Sullivan didn't rise when the High Speaker was thrown to his knees. He didn't gloat, didn't sneer, didn't revel in the destruction his fleet had caused. He simply looked at the Vicranian, his expression patient. "Do you understand what's happening yet?" Sullivan asked, voice calm, measured. The High Speaker fought to steady his breathing. "You believe you've won something here," he hissed. "But this will only bring the full weight of the galaxy upon you." Sullivan exhaled, rubbing his temples as if he had expected this answer. "You think too small," he said. "You still see this as a battle. It isn't." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the high speakers with a quiet, terrifying intensity. "This is a revolution." The chamber was silent. Sullivan tapped a control on his wrist. A hologram flickered to life, displaying transmission logs, intercepted fleet movements, the entire strategy of humanity's war effort laid bare. "We've been planning this for years," Sullivan continued. "We let you think we were fractured, weak, disorganized. We let you think we'd be too afraid to fight back." He gestured towards the display. "And now?" The first domino has fallen. The high speaker's mandibles quivered as he processed what he was seeing. This wasn't a rogue attack. This was an empire rising. You don't have the numbers," he whispered. "The Council's forces outmatch yours 10-1. Sullivan nodded. "Yeah, they do." He smiled slightly. "But tell me something. How many of them actually want to fight for you?" The high speaker hesitated. Sullivan leaned back in his chair. "See, that's the real trick. Your empire was built on fear, on suppression. You thought ruling through intimidation made you strong, but you never realized what would happen the moment someone actually stood up to you." The high speaker's mind raced. He had always assumed the other species of the galaxy feared the humans as much as the Council did. But if what Sullivan was implying was true, humanity didn't just come for war. They came to turn the entire galaxy against the Council. Sullivan pressed another button. The display shifted to real-time transmissions, messages from worlds that had lived under the Council's rule for centuries. Some were in shock, some were uncertain, but many were celebrating. "The moment news of Vecran 6 spreads," Sullivan said, "the Council's authority will start cracking. You've ruled for so long that you forgot what happens when people realize their rulers aren't invincible." He stood up now, walking towards the high speaker with deliberate steps. "And make no mistake," he continued, voice ironclad. "We're not here to ask for a seat at your table. We're not here to prove ourselves to you." He crouched down, his face now level with the trembling alien. "We're here to burn the table to the ground." The high speaker finally understood. This wasn't an uprising. This wasn't a rebellion. This was the end of the Galactic Council, and humanity was taking its place. The weight of the moment crushed the high speaker like a collapsing star. The Galactic Council was finished. He could see it now, like a vision of the inevitable. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. And it was all because of them, the humans. They hadn't just defeated the Council's fleet. They had done something far worse. They had exposed them. Sullivan stood back up, his presence commanding, radiating the quiet assurance of a man who had already won. The humans hadn't just seized Vecran 6, they had set the galaxy on fire. "Now," the Admiral continued, glancing at his officers, "there's one last thing to discuss." A soldier stepped forward, placing a small device on the table. A simple console, sleek, unassuming, except for the red indicator blinking softly in its center. The high speaker stared at it. "You..." His voice wavered. "What is this?" Sullivan exhaled, as if disappointed that the Vecranian hadn't already figured it out. "This is the part where you tell the galaxy what just happened," he said simply. The high speaker's mandibles clicked rapidly. You want me to broadcast a message?" "No," Sullivan corrected. "I want you to surrender." The room went dead silent. The high speaker recoiled. "Impossible," he spat. "I will never—" "Yes, you will." The words weren't spoken with anger, not with threats. They were spoken with the absolute certainty of a man stating an undeniable truth. Sullivan gestured toward the display once more. The transmission feed shifted, revealing new footage from the ground below. Entire garrisons of Council troops were being overrun. The streets of Vekren 6, once a shining beacon of power, were being claimed by the invaders. Human banners unfurled, replacing the symbols of the old order. The High Speaker could see them. Council forces surrendering by the thousands. Some dropped their weapons before even firing a shot. Others turned against their own officers. And then the worst part. The High Speaker recognized some of the cities being shown. But something was wrong. He peered closer, his eyes widening in horror. Those weren't cities on Vekran 6. They were other worlds. Sullivan grinned. Yeah, you're not the only ones falling apart, Bug. The High Speaker felt his insides twist. Even before the battle had ended, the cracks had begun to spread. Other planets, other council-held worlds had seen the battle's outcome. Some were uprising already. The domino effect had started, and humanity had only pushed the first one. You can resist, Sullivan said, stepping closer. You can hold out, but every day you do, another world will rise. Another world will fall out of your control. The High Speaker looked down at the console again, the blinking red light, the waiting message, a formal surrender. Sullivan leaned in once more. His voice dropped to a low, deadly whisper. Or, he said, you can be the first to admit the truth, that your empire is done, that your rule ends today. The High Speaker's limbs trembled. He knew in that moment that the Council had never ruled through strength. They had ruled through fear, and fear only worked if no one challenged it. For the first time in 1,000 cycles, the galaxy had seen a new kind of strength. A strength that wasn't built on keeping others down, but on fighting tooth and nail for survival. And that strength, that human resilience, it had just won. Trembling, broken, the High Speaker reached for the console. Sullivan nodded approvingly. The Galactic Council was over, and the age of humanity had begun. The High Speaker's claw hovered over the console. His breathing was ragged, his mind shattered. This was it. The moment where he could either fight a futile war or acknowledge reality. The Galactic Council was dead. With a final defeated exhale, he pressed the console's activation switch. The holographic projector flickered, linking directly to the Central Council broadcasting relay. Every surviving world in the Empire, every ship, every station, every ruler, was now watching. His reflection stared back at him, once the voice of the most powerful institution in the galaxy. Now, he was just another leader on his knees before a species that was never supposed to matter. He swallowed his pride and spoke. This is High Speaker Zelvor of the Galactic Council. His voice, though steady, held the weight of centuries crashing down at once. I am broadcasting this message to all Council worlds, to all sectors, to all remaining forces. He closed his eyes. The war is over. He could feel the moment the galaxy changed. Across star systems, entire fleets, entire civilizations watched in shock as their ruler, their unshakable leader, conceded defeat. The image of human soldiers standing behind him was seared into history. I call upon all remaining forces to stand down immediately, he continued, the words acidic on his tongue. Resistance is futile. The humans have taken Vekran 6. They have shattered our fleets. They are... He swallowed hard, mandibles clicking. They are now the dominant power in the galaxy. A death knell. Sullivan leaned back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as the words spread like wildfire. Some would never accept it. Some would resist. But it didn't matter. The illusion of the Council's invulnerability had shattered, and a broken empire could not stand. The transmission cut out. The High Speaker slumped, the weight of his words draining the last of his resolve. Sullivan turned to one of his officers. Start the secondary transmissions. I want this message distributed to every resistance cell, every council colony that's been under their boot. Let them know," he gestured to the speaker, "that their masters just gave up." The officer nodded and got to work. Sullivan then crouched in front of the high speaker, studying him like an old relic. "Hell of a speech," he said. "Not bad, considering you probably wanted to rip my head off a few hours ago." Zelvor didn't answer. Sullivan smirked. "You thought we were the ones who weren't supposed to arrive." He stood. "Turns out we weren't just meant to arrive." He turned toward the viewport, watching as human banners were raised over the capital below. "We were meant to take over." The fires of war had barely cooled before the new order began. Human ships patrolled the space lanes once held by the Council. The former rulers of the galaxy had fractured overnight, some choosing to collaborate, others trying to fight a war that was already lost. Some still refused to accept reality. On the far side of the galaxy, remnants of the old empire, rogue admirals, loyalist fleets began to gather. But for every rebellion that sparked, 100 more worlds saw opportunity. No longer ruled by fear, they rose. Not against humanity, but alongside them. Because the truth was undeniable. The Galactic Council had ruled through oppression. Humanity ruled through defiance, and nothing in the galaxy could stand against that. Final transmission from Earth, year 1 of the human era. To every species, every world, every survivor of the old order, hear this. The war is over. Humanity has taken the stage. You can join us or you can fight us. But either way, the galaxy belongs to us now. The Galactic Council was gone. Humanity had shattered the old order, burned it from the inside out, and rewritten the future in its own image. But the galaxy was far from at peace. Year 2 of the human era. The remnants' war begins. Even with the Council's surrender, chaos spread like wildfire across the stars. Some species welcomed human rule, grateful for the end of an empire that had kept them in chains for centuries. Others resisted, clinging to the ashes of their former power. And then there were those who saw an opportunity. Some of the Council's most dangerous leaders had survived the fall. They had fled into the void, gathering what was left of their shattered fleets, preparing for war. One such remnant was Grand Marshal Dor Ven, once the Council's supreme military strategist. He had disappeared after the surrender of Vecran 6, vanishing into uncharted space. No one knew where he had gone. Until now. Sullivan sat in the war room aboard HSS Retribution, his flagship. The holographic display showed a grainy transmission, a deep space relay intercepted by human intelligence teams. Dor Ven stood in the center of the projection, his dark eyes burning with hatred. "You think this war is over," the alien snarled. "You believe humanity has won?" He stepped forward, voice filled with a cold, terrifying certainty. "You do not understand what you have done." Sullivan leaned forward, jaw tightening. The Council was stagnant, weak. It was never meant to last forever. But you... Dor Ven's mandibles twitched into something resembling a smile. "You have given us something we never had before. A reason to evolve." The transmission ended. The war room was silent. One of Sullivan's officers, Lieutenant Harper, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, what does that mean?" Sullivan didn't answer immediately. He exhaled slowly, staring at the darkened display. He knew exactly what it meant. The Council had ruled through fear, through control, through subjugation. But their remnants, the ones who had survived humanity's firestorm, they were about to fight a war on different terms. This wouldn't be the same empire that had crumbled under human defiance. This would be something new, something born from the ashes of defeat. Sullivan turned toward the officers gathered in the war room, his voice steady. "Get the fleet ready," he ordered. Harper frowned. Are we launching a counteroffensive? Sullivan shook his head. No. He turned back to the viewport, watching as Earth's banners waved in the void. They're not coming to defend their old empire, he muttered. They're coming to wipe us out. The human empire versus the remnants. War for the future. The first battle was only weeks away, and the real test of humanity's rule was about to begin. Year 2 of the human era. The war for the future begins. The first strike came faster than anyone expected. A week after Dorven's transmission, a human-controlled trade station near the Vexus Expanse was reduced to drifting wreckage. Survivors spoke of shadow fleets, warships with unfamiliar markings, faster and stronger than anything the old council had ever deployed. By the time Sullivan's fleet arrived, the battle was already over. The enemy had taken nothing. No cargo, no prisoners. They had simply destroyed, then vanished back into the void. But this wasn't just about destruction. This was a message. HSS Retribution. Aboard the human flagship, Sullivan studied the holographic wreckage, his hands tightening into fists. Around him, his officers waited for his reaction. "This isn't the Council," said Harper. She was the best intelligence officer in the fleet, and her tone carried an edge of unease. Their tactics are different, more precise, more aggressive. Sullivan exhaled. They're adapting. He tapped a command into the display. The wreckage zoomed in, highlighting a section of the ruined station. A symbol was painted along one of the surviving bulkheads, a clawed hand gripping a burning star. They have a name now, Harper said grimly. Sullivan nodded. The Ashen Claw. Dorven's survivors had reorganized into something far more dangerous than the old Galactic Council. They weren't an empire anymore. They were a doctrine, a fanatical belief in their species' right to reclaim the stars, by any means necessary. And their first target? Humanity. The first skirmish. Battle over Arcadia Prime. The first real battle came over Arcadia Prime, one of humanity's newest colonies. The Ashen Claw struck fast and without mercy. Their ships were leaner, deadlier, covered in modified armor plating. They had studied human warfare and learned. Human forces fought back with everything they had. Railguns tore through enemy hulls, fighter squadrons weaved between capital ships, and the void itself burned with the sheer firepower unleashed on both sides. But for the first time since humanity's rise, the enemy did not break. Unlike the old Council forces, who had relied on their reputation to keep power, the Ashen Claw fought like men possessed. They adapted to human battle tactics in real time. They used flanking maneuvers, electronic warfare, and brutal suicide strikes that sent ships crashing into human formations. Even Sullivan, who had fought in the bloodiest battles of the war, felt something unfamiliar creeping in as he watched the carnage unfold. Doubt. Could they actually win this fight? The battle raged for 36 hours before the Ashen Claw finally withdrew, leaving the skies over Arcadia Prime littered with thousands of human dead. Humanity had won the battle, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a victory. The war shifts. Humanity on the defensive. Over the next few months, the war spiraled into a deadlock. The Ashen Claw struck deep into human-controlled space, hitting supply lines, destabilizing colonies, and spreading fear among newly conquered worlds. They weren't trying to rebuild an empire. They were trying to make sure humanity never ruled anything again. And they were succeeding. HSS Retribution, the decision that would change everything. Sullivan stood in the war room, staring at the star map. Every red-marked battle zone was another place where the Ashen Claw had struck. We're losing ground, Harper said bluntly. At this rate, we won't be the ones running an empire anymore. We'll be the ones fighting for survival. Sullivan clenched his jaw. He knew what had to be done. For years, humanity had fought like rebels, scrappy, defiant, overwhelming their enemies through sheer force of will. But they weren't the underdogs anymore. They were the rulers now, and that meant fighting like rulers. Sullivan turned to his officers. His voice was cold, resolute. "It's time we stop reacting," he said. He pointed at the star map, at a system near the dead heart of the old empire. "We take the fight to them." The counteroffensive begins. The next phase of the war would decide everything. Either humanity would crush the last remnants of the old empire, or the galaxy would watch them burn. Year 3 of the human era. The invasion of Korav Prime. The Ashen Claw had made one fatal mistake. They had spent the last year striking from the shadows, launching devastating raids, retreating before humanity could mount a proper counteroffensive. They were ghosts, unpredictable, fast, dangerous. But every army, no matter how disciplined, needed a home, and humanity had finally found it. HSS Retribution. War Room Sullivan stood over the holodisplay, watching the intelligence feeds pour in. Korav Prime, an old, abandoned military world, had become the Ashen Claw's primary base of operations. It was deep in the shattered ruins of the former Council's empire, far from human-controlled space. It was a fortress, massive orbital defenses, surface-to-space cannons, a fleet twice the size of anything humanity had faced since the war began, and they were about to take it head-on. "Final confirmation," Harper said, glancing at him. "Are we doing this?" Sullivan didn't hesitate. "Send the fleet." Operation Iron Veil. The assault begins. Humanity's war fleet, nearly 500 warships, the largest force ever assembled, dropped out of FTL above Korav Prime. The Ashen Claw was waiting. The Battle of Korav Prime. The void erupted. Humanity's battle doctrine was simple. Overwhelming firepower, relentless advance. Railguns launched hypervelocity rounds, tearing through enemy ships. Missile swarms blotted out the stars. Fighter squadrons weaved between capital ships, targeting weak points in the Ashen Claw's formations. But the enemy had learned. Ashen Claw warships were faster than before, their armor reinforced against human weaponry. They moved unpredictably, countering human tactics with brutal efficiency. Their capital ships, relics of the old empire, rebuilt for war, unleashed plasma storms that melted human vessels in seconds. For every Ashen Claw ship destroyed, 3 human warships burned. And then the planetary defenses came online. From the surface of Korav Prime, massive rail cannons fired into orbit, ripping human battleships apart. Entire fleets disintegrated before they could even reach the atmosphere. It was a slaughter. Sullivan watched from the bridge of HSS Retribution, his knuckles white. "This isn't working," Harper said, shaking her head. "We're getting picked apart." Sullivan clenched his jaw. There was only one option left. "We're taking the fight to the surface." The final gambit, ground invasion with orbital superiority impossible, humanity did something insane. They landed troops in the middle of a war zone. Drop pods rained from the sky. Massive Titan-class walkers touched down in fire and ruin. Legions of human marines, battle-hardened, armored in power suits, marched onto the battlefield. And the streets of Korav Prime became a nightmare. The Ashen Claw had prepared for an invasion. Their warriors, fanatical, unrelenting, fought with terrifying efficiency. They knew the terrain. They knew how humans fought. And they were ready to die to the last. Every street became a meat grinder. Every block was paid for in blood. Even with overwhelming firepower, even with superior numbers, humanity was being slowed, drained, broken, and then Sullivan himself entered the battlefield. The end of the Ashen Claw, Sullivan led from the front, He fought in the rubble, his armor dented, his rifle overheated, standing side by side with his soldiers. And slowly, block by block, ruin by ruin, humanity pushed forward. By the time they reached the Ashen Claw's last stronghold, a massive citadel, built from the bones of the old empire, there were only a few hundred enemy warriors left. At the top of the tower stood Dorven himself, the last warlord of the Ashen Claw. Sullivan climbed the ruined steps, his rifle raised. Dorven's mandibles curled into something resembling a smile. "You have fought well, human," the alien rasped, "but you have made a mistake." Sullivan narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" Dorven lifted his hand. "I was never fighting to win." The air shook, a tremor rippled through the ground, and deep below the citadel, something exploded. The final sacrifice. The Ashen Claw had never intended to defend Korav Prime. They had lured humanity here to trap them, to end them. Massive plasma cores, old warheads from the former Council's golden age, detonated. Sullivan barely had time to react before the entire planet began to break apart. "You should have let us die in the shadows," Dorven rasped. Then he stepped backward into the fire. Sullivan ran. Across the crumbling battlefield, human soldiers scrambled for their dropships as Korav Prime collapsed. Entire mountains shattered, the sky turned to fire, oceans boiled, and at the last moment, just before the flames swallowed everything, humanity escaped. The aftermath. A Pyrrhic victory. The Ashen Claw was dead, but the price had been catastrophic. Over 200 warships lost, over 1 million human lives burned away, and at the end of it all, humanity had won. Final transmission, Earth Command, to all forces, to all colonies. The war is over. The last remnants of the old empire have been eradicated. But let history remember, we did not win with words. We did not win with diplomacy. We won with fire. The galaxy. After the war, with the Ashen Claw destroyed, the galaxy belonged to humanity. Some species welcomed them as liberators, others feared them as conquerors, but none dared to challenge them again. Because when the dust settled, the lesson was clear. No one was meant to arrive. And yet humanity came anyway. And when they did, they took the stage.